Hello, everyone. Welcome back. If you're new, this is another in the 10-minute tips series of advice for credit and collection professionals. I'm doing this presentation at the request of one of the members of my LinkedIn group called Business to Business Credit and Collections. This one is called Common Mistakes That Result in Bad Debt Losses. Introduction. I think factually, we really have two choices. We can either learn from the mistakes that we make, or alternatively, we don't learn and we risk repeating those mistakes. In this presentation today, we're going to focus on the mistakes that can result in bad debt losses. It is my opinion and it is my experience that bad debt losses are not always and not necessarily the results of errors made by someone in the credit department. By way of introduction, bad debt losses are, again, in my opinion, a cost of doing business on open account terms. Well, you might ask, why do I say that? Because every single sale that we make to any customer on open account terms carries with it some amount of risk of payment delay or payment default. And that is absolutely true, irrespective of whether the customer is working out of their garage or is a Fortune 50 company. I'm absolutely convinced when it comes to lessons to be learned that there is at least one lesson to be learned from every single bad debt loss that we incur. It turns out that some of the lessons are fairly obvious. For example, the bad debt loss was the result of the credit file being seriously out of date, or the bad debt occurred or was made more serious by the fact that the credit limit had been exceeded, or we didn't request updated financial statements from the customer in a timely manner, and as a result, we were not aware of that customer's deteriorating financial condition. It is my recommendation that we perform an autopsy, an assessment, every time a bad debt write-off occurs. What primarily we're looking for, of course, is the cause of the loss. And as a result of that, what changes may be necessary to prevent similar losses in the future. Now, when we talk about necessary changes, that would include, but are not limited to, changes in processes, in policies, in personnel, and in procedures. Other necessary changes might include training or coaching or mentoring, because often the lesson learned, again from my experience, is that more training or retraining is the key to future success. When you do this post-loss assessment, when you perform the autopsy, you find a variety of different outcomes. For example, sometimes the autopsy will indicate or conclude that the loss could have been and or should have been prevented, or could have been or should have been mitigated or limited or reduced through actions of the credit department. Occasionally, and again, this is from my experience, occasionally your analysis will indicate that no errors have been made by someone in the credit department. And oftentimes, a review will indicate that the loss could have been lower if someone had taken action sooner. So it's not that no action was taken, it's that action wasn't taken quickly enough. So I'm a consultant, and one of the things I'm asked to do from time to time is come in and do an assessment after the fact. And often, the assessment that I do points to the idea that someone has violated an existing policy and procedure, and that was a big contributor to the bad debt loss that was incurred. Having said that, it's important to reiterate the purpose of this autopsy is to find facts and fix problems. It's not to assign punishment to someone who acted in a way which was contrary to the instructions, the rules, the policies, the procedures. The goal is improvement and preventing problems of a similar nature in the future because, as we know, the most expensive mistake that any of us can make is to not learn from a mistake that's been made and potentially to repeat that mistake in the future. I want to spend a moment thinking and talking about your company's tolerance for risk of slow payment, and risk in this case, as it relates to bad debts, of non-payment. Because it's clear to me, and I hope it will be to you, that bad debt losses are going to be linked to your credit risk tolerance or your company's tolerance for uncertainty. If your company has a low tolerance for uncertainty, then you're going to be more risk averse. You're going to take additional actions to safeguard your receivables. And as a consequence, your bad debt losses are going to be lower than a company that is risk averse, that has policies in place that tend to limit risk. Well, the way that we limit risk, specifically the risk of bad debts, is we limit our credit granting to customers that are considered more credit worthy. Unfortunately, credit risk tolerance is difficult to describe and to quantify. Every creditor's company's tolerance is going to be different, their tolerance for payment delays and payment defaults. And there's a key problem here as it relates to risk tolerance and credit decision making. And that obvious problem is that the credit decision maker has to have a clear understanding about their company's expectations as it relates to the types of risks that are being taken by the credit department. I think it's clear that credit decision makers, the credit manager, the person that is responsible for deciding credit limits, people who are responsible for deciding credit limit increases, releasing orders, etc. The decision maker must weigh the potential risks and the potential rewards every time they make one of those decisions. Understanding the relationship between risk and reward is a key component of credit risk management. How are those decisions made? Well, they're made on the basis of a variety of facts and factors, including experience and education and insights about the company's risk tolerance. The problem for us is that trying to determine the right amount of risk to take is not intuitive and it's not obvious. The good news, in a sense, is that decision makers often get insights and guidance about how much risk to take in ongoing discussions with senior management. And if you are a decision maker and you're not meeting regularly with senior management to have those discussions about risk tolerance, I would strongly encourage you to do exactly that. I think you might be asking yourself at some point, why should the credit department be talking with senior management about the decision-making process? Isn't that just shifting the burden upstream to senior management? And the answer is the credit department, the credit decision maker, is not in a position to decide in a vacuum what risks are and what risks are unacceptable to their organization. In effect, senior management needs to set the tone. They need to determine your department's credit risk tolerance. Why? Well, because senior management understands the company's strategies, its goals, its risk-taking experience, its risk culture, and how executives, owners, senior management perceives and considers and evaluates risk. Of course, the credit decision maker is going to have their inputs. They're going to have comments, they're going to have thoughts, they're going to have opinions that, in fact and indeed, they should share with senior management about how much risk is and is not acceptable. And here's a bit of good news. It turns out that appropriate credit risk management action and decisions create a competitive advantage for the creditor company. And this is provided that risk is managed proactively and provided that the credit risks are managed systematically and comprehensively by the entire credit team, not simply the decision maker, but the people that implement the decisions and the people that do the work, such as, for example, the deduction team or the collectors. Dealing with the risk of loss. Clearly, you can avoid certain credit risks by refusing to extend credit to high risk or at-risk customers. For most of us, this is simply not a viable option. Why? Well, for a variety of reasons, including the idea that the role of the credit decision maker involves effectively managing credit risk, not avoiding credit risk. And that's why credit pros, credit decision makers, focus on looking for a way to make the sale safely rather than looking for a reason or for an excuse not to make the sale. A couple of things are pretty clear. One is that refusing to sell to high-risk customers would reduce sales and profits to unacceptable levels. Another thing that's clear is it's necessary to refuse to extend credit to some customers and to some applicants on a case-by-case basis, meaning those customers or applicants that represent an unacceptably high risk. But the trick is to identify what constitutes an unacceptable credit risk. And that task, that differentiating between good and bad or high risk and unacceptable risk, is done using experience and education and information. And again, it requires inputs from senior management to make sure that we properly balance risk and reward. So thank you for attending today. I hope you found this presentation to be useful. If you're interested in learning more about preventing bad debt losses, please contact Wisconsin Business Credit Services to request the complete presentation. Again, thank you and have a great day.